Good morning, Logos. My name is Peter, and I want to share the word with you today from Proverbs chapter 24 and 25. The title of the talk today is Like Honey, and it's part of a kind of loosely organized series or set of sermons about relationships. And I have a few topics in mind that I hope will be relevant for you and your church. And today it's called Like Honey from Proverbs 24 to 25. I'm going to read the passage and then I'll ask you to pray with me. Verse 13. Eat honey, my son, for it is good. Honey from the comb is sweet to your taste. Know also that wisdom is like honey for you. If you find it, there is a future hope for you, and your hope will not be cut off. And then chapter 25, verse 16. If you find honey, eat just enough. Too much of it, and you will vomit. It is not good to eat too much honey, nor is it honorable to search out matters that are too deep. Let's pray together. God, thank you for this word we are about to receive. I pray that this sermon will be really helpful. I pray that it will illuminate some realities about life. I pray that it would cause us to turn our eyes upward and to look for you and to find you and to be satisfied in you. And I know that sounds maybe a little bit ethereal, but I think there's some real substance and something concrete there. So help us to experience a bit of that today together in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. Now I'll start with a story about my mom. My mom is a woman that I would describe as a kind of Old Testament prophetess. She just had a way of communicating that was very intense and metaphorical and just a storyteller of sorts. And so, she would had this one saying. She had a lot of sayings, but she had this one saying where whenever she ate something really, really delicious, she would say, "Oh, Peter, this is just like honey," right? So if she had, like soup, it was really good and tasted nothing like honey, she would say, "Oh, Peter, this is just like honey, tastes like honey." And then sometimes, if she would actually have honey, like kind of a naturopathic kind of person. And so honey was always available. And sometimes she would take a spoonful of honey and she would, kind of put it in my mouth. And she'd say, "Peter, have some of this honey. This honey is just like medicine." And so everything else is like honey, but honey itself is like medicine. And I love the way she talked. It's sort of in a circular way like this, because that's exactly what today's passage does. It talks in this sort of metaphorical, almost metaphysical kind of way. And this is what I mean by my mom was kind of like this Old Testament type of person. But here is the main truth that I want to hit on today. Here it is. Everything in life is actually just an analogy. Everything in life is just a metaphor. Everything in life is a sign or an arrow that's pointing somewhere else. Just like with my mom, you eat something and that something isn't the thing itself. It actually is just an arrow or a sign pointing to honey. And then when you get to honey and you eat honey, honey itself isn't honey. It's pointing to something else, and that something is medicine, right? And that's what life is like. Nothing itself is anything in and of itself. And in fact, the very best things in life are the best because they're the best at pointing to something else. It gives you a feeling. It reminds you. It promises you. It gives you something beyond itself. It's pointing. The very best things in life are mere placeholders. Right? I remember the first time I got my hands on an iPhone. And I remember it was so promising. That was the lure of the iPhone. The iPhone itself wasn't the thing it pointed to. It pointed to life outside, somewhere out there. It gave you maps. It gave you email that promised to make connections for you. It promised convenience. It promised a way of living, a way of interacting with life that was going to be better. And that's really the beauty of the iPhone, is that it's this portal to something else, something more. And so the very best devices, the very best technology isn't just kind of pointing to itself. It's not so that you can sort of stare at the thing, but it's so that it serves you in something else, right? That's what life is. That's what things in life are. Here's a quote from one of my favorite theologians and prophets of our time, Dave Chappelle. During one of his specials, he opens it like this: "Good people of Atlanta, we must never forget that Anthony Bourdain killed himself. Anthony Bourdain had the greatest job that showbiz has ever produced. This man flew around the world and ate delicious meals with outstanding people. That man with that job hung himself in a luxury suite in France." Now think about this kind of shocking but truth-filled quote just for a moment here. You know, you think that Anthony Bourdain had everything. He was this really beloved person. He has this amazing job, this amazing life. Dave Chappelle spells it out. He flew around the world and ate delicious meals with outstanding people. And when he did that, he realized those things weren't it. Those things did not give him what he needed, what he wanted, what he was missing. And so after having everything that his heart could desire, tasting everything that his belly could ever want, he hung himself in a luxury suite in France. Now, I share this story not to minimize, this way of ending one's life. I'm not trying to simplify the complexity that is depression and other related issues that are antecedents to an act like suicide. I'm not saying that. I'm pointing to the general truth that everything else keeps telling you to keep going. This isn't it. And I think you and I know this, that honey itself isn't actually honey. It's just sort of pointing to medicine. And then medicine itself isn't the thing. Medicine itself is pointing to something. It's pointing to health. It's pointing to freedom, pointing to a different way of living life. And then when you live that life, it itself isn't sort of the arrival. The arrival itself tells you to keep going. You haven't arrived yet. Everything points to something else. Here's John chapter 14, verse 20. On that day, you will realize that I am in my Father, and you are in me, and I am in you. Now, this is one of my life verses. I love this because I'm still waiting for that day when I will finally realize that the thing, the big thing, the bottom line thing, the final thing that I have been searching for my whole life in all of the areas I've ever searched, in all of the things I've ever held in my hands, all the views I've ever beheld in my eyes, all of the toys I've ever played with, all the food I've ever eaten, all the conversations I've ever had, all the relationships I've ever been in, all the people that have loved me, all the people I've ever loved, in every pursuit of thing or knowledge. All of that was really, really just pointing to this oneness with God, that Jesus is in the Father, and that I am in Jesus, and that Jesus is in me, that this is really this kind of oneness, this unity, this final togetherness that I have been searching for. Like I love researching, but I can't really become one with the knowledge, because it's not really oneness with knowledge that I'm looking for. It's really oneness with the truth that I'm longing for. And when I say truth, I realize it's not a sort of a disembodied set of information. It really is the person who is the truth, the embodiment of truth itself, the really only integrous and loving and perfect being that embodies all that is true and good and right. And that really person is Jesus. And one day I will realize that everything has been about Jesus and oneness with him, right? And John 14 promises us that one day I will realize this. And so I'm able to kind of hold everything else then loosely. Everything else is a kind of placeholder. I know this. And so I'm able to not be so devastated, not be so disappointed, right? So weddings and jobs and relationships and things and experiences, all that my heart and my body and my consciousness longs for, it's really just a placeholder, an arrow. Everything, even the very best things, point. And this is what we read about in the Bible today, that even honey itself isn't honey. That honey even falls short of what honey stands for. So you long for honey, and then you get to honey, and you taste it, and then you have your fill of it, and you realize, oh, honey isn't actually what I was after. Honey was more symbolic. It was more a placeholder. Well, I'll keep going then, right? And so the thing that is like honey is actually better than honey itself. And the purpose of honey, the usefulness of honey, is in pointing to something else, something like honey, right? Honey itself, the actual honey, today's passage tells us, it's going to make us vomit. There's a warning. It's when you find honey, eat it. But if you have too much, you will vomit it. That's what the passage says, right? And so this is what I know to be true about life itself. I remember one time at one of these Korean church retreats, we had a water drinking contest. And I don't know if you've ever been in a water drinking contest, but I'll tell you, every water drinking contest ends the exact same way, right? Because water, yes, it's good. It represents life. That's why it's good. It's something we need. That's why it's good. But water itself actually is going to poison you. If you have too much water, you can literally drown in water. All of the sodium balance is going to be off and you drown to death. And so your body's reaction to too much water is what? It's to throw it up. And so every single water drinking contest you've ever seen ends with people vomiting. And so this contest creators knew this because they had vomit buckets next to every single water drinking station. Kind of torturous and abusive now, think about it. But even water, as good and as necessary as it is, if you have too much, you're going to actually literally die. Same thing with alcohol. I know many of you enjoy a glass of wine or cool, refreshing pint of beer or something like that, but have too much and it's poisonous. Have too much and it literally will ruin your life, right? Because alcohol, it points to something. It points to disinhibition, or it points to a lessening of anxiety, social anxiety or something, but it's a means to an end. Same thing with a human being. You think this person is amazing and you start idealizing, you start kind of seeing this person in a mythical or heroic way, and the idea is don't get too close because everybody's a 50-footer. Stay away and they're fine, but if you get close and if you are with them long enough, you will eventually be disappointed because every person is just a placeholder. And same thing with churches. Churches are sort of just placeholders. You get too close, you stay in it too long, and then eventually it disappoints you because something that's like a church, what a church stands for, is actually greater than what the church itself literally is. Same thing with any job, any experience, any vacation, right? It's like the plane, you're waiting in the terminal and you're at your gate and you're just wanting to get on that plane so bad, right? And you're rushing to get on, and then as soon as the plane lands, you're rushing to get off because the plane was just a means to an end. It's just A to B, but it's not itself the thing. I'm going to read chapter 24 again. Eat honey, my son, for it is good. Honey from the comb is sweet to your taste. Yes, eat honey. And then the passage goes on. Know also that wisdom is like honey for you. If you find it, there is a future hope for you, and your hope will not be cut off. And so honey is a metaphor here. It's good, eat it. And then it says the writer of Proverbs says honey is like wisdom, and wisdom is like honey. And if you find it, it's good. But what does it say, right? In chapter 25, if you find honey, eat just enough. Because why? Too much of it, and you will vomit. It is not good to eat too much honey, nor is it honorable to search out matters that are too deep. Referring back to chapter 24. Honey is good, but don't eat too much. You will vomit. Wisdom is good because wisdom is like honey. But if you search it out too much, it's not honorable, right? It's like, don't ask too much of honey. Honey will only be this very finite, temporary thing, which is really just an arrow pointing to something like honey. If you ask too much of it, you will vomit it. Right? If you look into anything too much, you're going to be disappointed because there's some disembodied wisdom or knowledge or information that can actually save you or give to you what you really, really are longing for, which is what? I mean, personally, I think it's John where he talks about the oneness with Christ. But if you think it's something else, go for it. What is it? What is it that you're really longing for? It's not even wisdom. That's what it says. So we apply this now. Spouses are not God. Spouses are not perfect. Even if they were perfect, that experience of perfection wouldn't be perfect for you because you are not perfect. What would you do with someone that is so perfect, right? You don't know how to handle perfection. And so they probably wouldn't even be with you. Why would a perfect person want to be with you? It wouldn't make any sense. And so spouses are just placeholders. Okay? Leadership. I mean, if we have not learned this in these last few years, I mean, leaders are not God. Leaders will disappoint you. Leaders are placeholders. Leaders are meant to point beyond themselves. And this is my prayer as a leader. In my success as a leader and in my failure, my hope is to point to somebody else, right? And how about the church? The same thing. The church is not God. Religion is not God. Theology is not God. And this is a tough one, this next one. The Bible is not God. God alone is God. The Bible points to God. Theology points to God. Religion points to God. Our concepts of God point to God himself. But your ideas about God are not God. God cannot be contained in our minds. Even life itself is only meant to point to Christ. Whether our life is good, whether our life is bad, in success and in failure, we point to God. Because ultimately, I believe, and I don't know if you do, but I believe it's God, the thing that we're really, really longing for, the thing that we were made for, the thing that we were created, designed, hardwired for. I want to read you a verse here in a moment here, but I want to apply this to Logos here for a second. Logos is over 2 decades old, and it's been through its ups and downs. And my great hope is that Logos will experience a new day. And I pray that that new day starts this year. And that's my assumption. That's my hope. That's my belief. That's my aim. But I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. But I do know that Logos is not meant to be perfect. I do know that Logos is not meant to be everything that every single person has hoped that it would be. I mean, that church doesn't exist. There's no way one church can meet all the expectations and covert expectations and hopes that everyone brings, regardless of whether they know it or not. That's not possible. And so my prayer for Logos is that Logos will experience a new day, but in its new day, whether it succeeds or it fails, the job, the purpose for which Logos exists is to point to Christ himself. And as long as this church will do that, I believe God has use for it. And I believe it will serve you, God's children, well. And so this is my prayer for Logos, and this is my benediction for the church and for each of you, and for anyone listening who will call Logos their church home. So here's John chapter 14, verse 20 as our benediction to end this sermon. On that day, you will realize that I am in my Father, and you are in me, and I am in you.